Thanks for inviting me into your home. Your long-haul truck, RV, camper, taxi, your parents' well-appointed basement with a simulated wood paneling, electric fireplace, and the painting of dogs playing poker. Your loft, that greasy spoon just off the interstate, and your cabin in the woods. Welcome to Coast AM. I'm Richard Serrett, and tonight, this morning, coming to you live from my home studio in Old Thornhill, just north of Toronto. Got to tell you this, about midnight, my time, an hour ago, the printer in the office where I'm sitting, which is located to my immediate right, left, to my left, the other left, the printer goes off, starts to print. Now, I assumed everyone in the house was fast asleep, the mighty Aphrodite, my mother-in-law, my twin boys. So for a split second, just a split second, I thought, poltergeist. Just a split second. Then one of my 16-year-olds comes lumbering down the stairs into my office. Said, "What are you doing up? What are you printing at midnight?" "Sheet music," he says. "What sheet music?" Franz Liszt, Lieberstrom, number 3, Love Dream. Said, "What on earth? At midnight?" He says, "I'm going to learn this piece in 3 months," he says, and then heads back upstairs. And at the top of the basement stairs, we have a little piano room. There's a nice little piano in there. It's also electric. So he plugs his headphones in and he starts plunking the keys and learning this piece by Franz Liszt, just the right hand, slowly pecking away. I could hear him banging away on the keys. A 16-year-old suddenly at midnight decides he has to learn Franz Liszt's Love Dream. Should I be worried? There must be a girlfriend. That's it. It's a girl. I knew it. We had a good day out on the backyard rink today. The twins and me and their cousin, my nephew Brandon from Brantford. It wasn't -5. Thank God. Earlier in the day, it was -25, but I think it was about -12 by the time we got out on the ice, and I can deal with that. The boys played for about 3 hours. I lasted about 30 minutes. I have to work on my wind, my conditioning. Anyway, the boys watched me skate, and with a bemused look on his face, one of them says, "Dad, you need to do some edge work." Edge work. Come on, I go forwards, and sometimes, if I'm lucky, I can go backwards. That's all you get. Edge work. Good grief. I see the Chinese spy balloon has been shot down 3 days after it was first spotted floating over sensitive nuclear military bases. An F-22 fighter jet fired an AIM-9X missile through the helium balloon, deflating it and sending the payload plummeting towards the Atlantic Ocean. An operation now underway in U.S. territorial waters to recover debris from the balloon, expected to include instruments and sensors. Whatever is recovered will be taken to an FBI laboratory in Quantico, Virginia, officials said. All right, good, about time. What about the second one coming up from Latin America? And a third Chinese spy balloon could also be lingering near U.S. interests, but officials won't say where it is. It was an anonymous source told the Washington Post a third balloon is likely operating near the U.S. after the first balloon was discovered hovering over Montana on Thursday, and then another was found above Latin America on Friday. So they've blown up the first one. Again, about time. What took them so long? I don't buy the argument they had to wait until the balloon was over water before shooting it down. That balloon was surveilling and gathering intel for at least 3 days, probably longer. So the damage has already been done. And I worried that the CCP was watching this all unfold very closely as they tested American resolve, American officials wringing their hands for half a week over a balloon. Next time, maybe they'll send a dozen, then 4 dozen, then 100. I think this is part of a psyop. But one day, those balloons may be carrying small nukes that could create massive EMPs, and America will be in the dark for a very long time. How many times Have we heard stories of Bigfoot encounters where Bigfoot is portrayed as some kind of shy and gentle giant, gathering berries and nuts, perhaps communicating telepathically, playing an innocent game of hide and seek with Bigfoot trackers? Well, tonight in the first half, Bigfoot perhaps as you've never heard it described before. A rampaging, dangerous predator. Get in its way and it will tear you limb from limb. William Sheehan has been gathering thousands upon thousands of eyewitness encounters of Bigfoot going back some 150 years. You may think twice about your next camping trip after hearing from William. Coming up in hours 3 and 4, Carl Gallups, an Amazon best-selling author, pastor, returns to Coast AM. His new book, The Yeshua Protocol, takes readers on an amazing ride through the scriptures, archaeology, science, technology, and sensational, biblically connected historical truths. But first, very scary and bloody Bigfoot encounters with William Sheehan. Welcome to the Audio Imaginarium. Come on in, weary traveler, hang your cloak on a peg, grab a stool, and come warm yourself by the fire. There are stories to be told, and you are among friends. I'm Richard Serrett, and this is Coast to Coast AM. Why don't you stay a while? William Sheehan is an avid fisherman, shooter, and bird watcher whose interest was stirred in Bigfoot at a young age. As a writer, he's taken it upon himself to both gather and report on Bigfoot sightings and evidential findings from the four corners of North America with his series podcast, Bigfoot Terror in the Woods Sightings and Encounters. William Sheehan, welcome to Coast AM. How are you?
It is my distinct pleasure, Richard, to be here with you tonight.
Now, William, I happen to know that you reside in Long Island in New York, which quite a ways from traditional Bigfoot stomping grounds, places like the Pacific Northwest. What's a Long Islander doing studying Bigfoot?
Well, this has been going on for a long time with me. I was originally turned on by the Patterson-Gimlin film. I do believe that the film was real right from the get-go. And going forward many years, I have a degree in occupational therapy. I'm a licensed massage therapist in New York. And I currently work for a cardiothoracic unit in a major hospital. And I have a lot of experience through college and work with human anatomy, taking anatomy, physiology, pathology, neurology, myology, kinesiology. And I have a very good working knowledge of, in particular, the human musculoskeletal system. So when I look back at the Patty film now and dissect it with my own eyes and with my own experience and knowledge, there is no way, in my opinion, that film was faked, which is exactly what I believed when I first saw it. Since then, what has further sparked me, it was actually a confirmation to me. I was fortunate enough. Now, many people have seen clips, photographs, and pieces of what I'm about to talk about. It's a map. The map is an evacuation chart, and it's two-sided, 3 feet by 5 feet, I would say, and it comes from the survival training grounds in Washington State, run by the military. The interesting thing about this map is it covers four to be exact, different areas in the state of Washington. One they call the Desert Training Area, which is northeast of Yakima. Then there's the Sherman Peak Training Area north of Spokane, between Spokane and Nelson. You have the Rainforest and River Training Area in the uppermost, northwest corner of the state, actually right near B.C. And then there's the Seashore Training Area, which is west of Portland. Now, here's the rub on this map. This map is not like your typical map. I believe it's made out of Tyvek, like the housing wrap.
Yes.
You can't really burn it. You could cut it with a pair of scissors, but you could throw this thing in your swimming pool for a year and pull it out with no damage to it. And there's so many things on this chart. They're all helps to a soldier learning how to evade and survive in the wilderness. But what I want to bring to your attention is in one corner, there's a category and pictures entitled Dangerous Animals. And in this corner, there are little photographs that were transposed onto the map for identification. A cougar, a moose, a badger, a black bear, bobcat, coyote, and American porcupine. And guess what else is on the map, Richard?
Oh, do tell.
It is an artist's depiction of a Sasquatch with Bigfoot in parentheses underneath it. And you know why they put an artist's depiction in there? Because in this day and age when everybody is bitching and moaning, where are the pictures? Even then, they couldn't get a picture of a Sasquatch to put on their own chart.
So this is an official military training map, training document. It's an official, it's from the U.S. military, right, to train their soldiers on survival. And this Sasquatch is listed among the dangerous animals one might encounter while, taking this survival training.
That is correct. And the edition that I have is the fourth edition, dated October 2007. But the copyright, plant picture and text, was copyrighted in 1970. Now, here's the rub on this. The Patterson-Gimlin film is said to have been taken on October 20th, 1967. If you just plug 2 more months onto that, you're in 68. This map in its origins was copyrighted in 1970 in a day and a time when there were no computers, no fancy copiers that we know of today. They had to have been working on this thing for a good long time before it came together in the fashion that it is. And my thoughts are these. These fellas, these military individuals that put together this map for training purposes, number one, they don't fool around. They're not going to talk about something or show you something that's not real. It would endanger people's lives, and that's not what they're about. In fact, this map was made to save lives and teach people how to save their lives, perhaps in enemy territory, perhaps having been shot down, perhaps having been separated from their comrades. And there are edible plants on here. There are all kinds of... The point I'm making is they knew about Bigfoot in that region before Patterson and Gimlin stumbled on Patty that day at the creek.
Right. And they also recognize that Bigfoot is a dangerous, fearsome creature.
That's correct.
Let me ask...
It's listed under dangerous animals, not friendly forest creatures.
Let me ask you how you started gathering these accounts, these encounters, eyewitness accounts of encounters, and because there's thousands upon thousands of them. How you started, and where do they come from?
Well, they come from all points of the compass, and I know you're a Canadian, and just for starters, Canada is rife with Bigfoot activity, particularly in Alberta, Ontario. Alberta, if I was going to name one area in your homeland, your neck of the woods, Alberta. But years ago, there were a lot of cheap, what I call like rag newspapers available. You'd find them like going into your doctor's office, sitting in a metal rack, a wire rack, going into a supermarket. Most of them were free. And a lot of them, I found out, were interconnected across the country with other publications of that ilk. And you could run ads in those papers for like $15, $20 for weeks, and you'd be in all of these. And you could run an ad for anything you want. So to put an ad in there, looking for people who have seen Bigfoot, believe they have encountered Bigfoot, etc., send your inquiries to this post office box, and wham, you're in business. Now, it's really nothing more at that time than like what Finding Bigfoot was doing with their production. And I know somebody who was at one of their town hall meetings who said it was completely legit what they were doing as far as the town hall, standing before them and the raising of hands. There are thousands upon thousands of people out there that have had encounters with Bigfoot. The problem is getting the people to talk about it. And once you talk to one person about it, many of those people know somebody else who they're willing to turn you on to. And I've even had those people not get back to me, having been recommended by their friend. So there's a stigma. There's a problem with Bigfoot where people are unnerved. They don't want to speak about it. They kind of want to push it out of their memory. A lot of people who have encountered Bigfoot say they're sorry it ever happened. They're suffering from like a PTSD, like a war veteran. They're traumatized. It's loused up their life of hiking and hunting in the woods. So this is not at all like a lot of people think of the creature that, I got to get close. I've got to see it. I need a photograph. You got people who are running for their lives from this thing. They're scared to death. Other people are walking around with flashlights in the dark trying to get up close and comfortable with this thing. I don't understand it, frankly.
Right. So hence you're domiciled in Long Island, as far away as possible from Bigfoot.
Well, Richard, first of all, I don't want anything to do with this creature. I have footprint casts sitting next to me that came from Oregon. I've been sent photographs. And, the interesting thing, Richard, is I live here on Long Island, right? We're in a relatively suburban area. Lots of houses, businesses. I'm a fisherman. I got to get away from where I am down to the ocean or the Long Island Sound to fish. But people in these places lose sight of the fact that there are 9.5 million square miles of real estate in North America. If you do a flyover from New York to California at night, you're lucky if you see a light bulb. There are plenty of places for things to live and thrive and hide. And I say continually that the people who are seeing these for the most part are people who are out there doing things that your average person doesn't think of doing, who lives in suburbia, who lives in a city setting, vis-a-vis hunting, hiking, fishing in remote locations, being in DEC, different environmental operations. By far, these are the people that are encountering these creatures.
All right. When we come back, William, we'll get into some of these encounters, many of them violent. William Sheehan on Bigfoot, like you've never heard it before. Back with more after these on Coast to Coast AM. Welcome back. Say hello on Twitter at Richard Syrett, S-Y, because I love you, R-E-T-T. As I mentioned, an F-22 shot down that suspected spy balloon. That's one of them gone anyway. The U.S. military shot it down. And footage posted on social media shows this F-22 jet from Langley Air Force Base circling the balloon before shooting it down. China's foreign minister has admitted the balloon and equipment it was carrying belonged to the country, but claimed it strayed into the United States due to force majeure, an act of God. The balloon had passed over several sensitive military installations before it was finally downed over the Atlantic Ocean near the Carolina coastline, and the Coast Guard warned mariners in the area of the potential hazard, and the Federal Aviation Administration temporarily shut down airspace in the region ahead of the military operation. And you can check out the video. That's in the highlight carousel up at coasttocoastam.com. Violent encounters with Bigfoot with William Sheehan. More of our conversation is next after these on Coast to Coast AM. And we are back with William Sheehan, the author of the Bigfoot Terror in the Woods series of books. And also you can check out the podcast, BigfootTerrorinthewoods.com, BigfootTerrorinthewoods.com. And of course, we've linked up to his website at coasttocoastam.com. And again, William, as I mentioned off the top of the show, most often when we hear about Bigfoot, we hear about this shy, elusive creature, and sometimes we even hear, oh, he can communicate or she can communicate with us telepathically. Well, we don't hear about this ferocious creature that has the massive strength, could pull us limb from limb, and in fact, you have some encounters that ended very badly for people. Some of them found in trees. Can you tell me about that?
Yeah, and as we enter into this, Richard, some of these are evidential finds that I leave up to you, me, and the listeners to make a determination as to what we think happened. But relative to that evasion chart, I know a soldier that was in one of those meetings. You can imagine thousands of them attended them through the years. And when questioned about the Bigfoot on the chart, they were told not to approach them aggressively. And when asked why, the officer said, "We have people who did that, and it didn't end well." Now, you and I can read into "didn't end well" any way you like. My mind works that somebody is not with us anymore. And I always use the example of when I was a young boy on a paper route. There were dogs who wagged their tail and came out to let you pet them, and there were dogs that wanted to tear you up. And that's exactly the way I look at Bigfoot. It's an animal. You don't know what you're up against. You don't know if they're having a good day, a bad day, if they're half starving. They got a toothache. They don't like you just because they don't like you. You don't know what you're dealing with, and it's foolishness to think that you're going to have a good time when you encounter one of them.
Earlier, you had shared with me an episode where search and rescuers, I believe, found a missing female hiker, and she was found way up high in a tree.
Well, it wasn't search and rescue people. This event happened in Northern California. There were two hunters. They had gone into an area. Now, by the way, this area was only accessed by the way they had come in. This was not someplace you would just find yourself in. You had to drive there, park your truck, and hike. And they were in there looking for a couple of locations to place their tree stands for the season's deer hunt. They located a couple of locations, and on their way out, they decided to look into an area they really hadn't set stands up in before. So one went over here, one went over there, and basically they said, shout to me if you see anything. So the one fella does shout to the other guy, hey, come over here, you got to see this. He comes over to where he's standing, and he's by a large pine tree with big boughs sticking off of the bottom, above head height. On one of the boughs, there was what was remaining of an additional limb that had snapped off due to weather or age or whatever, was this stump. On top of the stump, shoved down over the stump was a female body with the stump protruding through her chest. She was draped over the branch, one leg missing, wearing a running shoe on the other foot, shorts, a kind of lycra or spandex top, and she had a ponytail. They were standing there as anyone would, like aghast.
Oh, I think we lost you there, William. Are you there?
Yes, I'm here. Can you hear me?
Oh, yeah, you started to fade away there. Just as you were describing, they're looking at this unfortunate victim
Draped
over this
over the
stump.
branch.
Yeah, draped over a stump, yes.
Yeah, so her body is, the stump is piercing through her body, and she's draped over it. Now, one of the observations they made was that not only was this horrific, but there was nothing to stand on on the ground, or no way to get this body up to the height it would have to be pushed over the stump in the position they found it. Unless something had climbed up the tree, walked out on a limb, and pushed the body down on it, or was big enough to lift it up and shove it down over it. Now, I don't know what you think of that, but I suspect violent Bigfoot activity involved in that situation.
How did that story come to you?
From people, we were talking about the old school way of like running ads, and of course at a time when long distance phone calls were very expensive. Now I have an iPhone. I have unlimited calling to North America and Mexico, including Canada. And of course with the Bigfoot Terror in the Woods podcast, I'm getting data and information all the time, including pictures, all kinds of good things coming to me now in the age that we live in. So, there are people out there seeing things and reporting things. You just got to be willing to talk to them and to try to coax that out of them. It's just the way it is.
There's another story. Sorry, go ahead.
No, I was just going to say a lot of people find me engaging listening to the podcast and having read the books, and they just come to me. In the cover of my book, I say, if you've seen something, say something, and I have my email address there. And just by that alone, people come out. I did see something. Here's my phone number. Go ahead.
When people recount these stories to you, and you mentioned some of them seem to be suffering perhaps from PTSD, this is not something they wish they saw. You also say in many cases they are just overcome with emotion telling these stories. In other words, these are not people telling these stories on a lark or trying to hoax you. These people, something very, very traumatic happened to these people.
Yeah, and I was taking an interview for a couple of hours just about a week or two ago from a fella in Oregon. He was getting choked up and emotional on the phone and just kind of had to excuse himself for a moment. And so his encounter was not horrific at all. Scary, yes. I would have been frightened to death. But just thinking about it and talking to me about it was choking this guy up. And I say, my wife passed away in July. You want to talk about being choked up and battling through some tears.
Yes.
But I'm not just walking around weeping about any old thing. It's got to be something traumatic before I start with the tears, And so when you're talking to somebody who says, like, I don't go into the woods anymore because of this. It loused me up. I don't like hunting anymore. I'm fearful. And I could tell you about some encounters here that would just rock your world.
Yeah, go ahead. I had one in particular in mind, but you offer one up, and then we'll get around to the one I'd like to hear about as well.
Absolutely. So all of these encounters, by the way, come from my books, Bigfoot Terror in the Woods, Sightings and Encounters. Now, this one I named the Bone Pile. I have two that I called the Bone Pile for different reasons. But this occurred in October 7th, 1999 in the Kootenay. near Mount Oki. And this fella had hiked in for about 6 miles into the woods. And he reached a point where, realizing the woods had been full of life coming in, it now dawned on him that everything had gotten very still and very quiet. And he said to me that he felt a cold chill go through his body, and actually like a charge. He called it like lightning passing through him. And he also felt that he was in imminent danger at the time. Now, all of this stuff just like piled onto him. And so he stayed there for a minute. The fog kind of cleared, so to speak, and he kept moving. Now, what he came upon was incredible. He sees a trail going through some brush, and he goes into it, and it opens up into what he described what looked like a campground. Tamped down, matted down ground with not even a weed growing through it. And in this campground setting are bones scattered everywhere. All kinds of bones, different animals, long, short, skulls. And he notices some camouflage. He goes over to where this camouflage is, and what he sees is the upper half of a human being that was wearing the camouflage jacket. He takes a stick, picks up the end of the jacket, what's left of it, and notices the pelvis and what is the rib cage of the individual who was evidently dead. Both legs were missing from the skeleton, and the arms and hands were visible through the decayed fabric as this poor man is laying on the ground. He describes the head. Now, when you find out what this guy does for a living, you're going to be blown away. He describes the head, particularly the facial structure, as looking as though a 6-inch pipe was driven through this man's head face on.
Wow.
Now, this guy was an orthopedic surgeon. Of all freaking people to run across a skeleton, an orthopedic surgeon. He left that place. He told me that he sold his extensive collection of firearms and never went hunting in the woods again.
How did he report that to the police? He must have.
Yeah, sure. No, he did. And he also went through the pocket on what was left of this camouflage coat, and he found an insurance card from an outfit in Northern California. So, how this guy got there, who he was, how that jogger got on the branch. These guys were not in a place where you would go jogging. That body was brought there from somewhere else.
The story that really sticks out for me, and I believe you covered this on the Bigfoot Terror in the Woods podcast as well. Mm-hmm. A group of fishermen, they had several boats. I think they were fishing for muskie, and they were just kind of offshore. Mm-hmm. There was really, really dense brush, but there was just a slight clearing leading down to the water's edge.
Yes. Yeah, I can bring you right into that. The report came from one of the boys who was on this trip as a youth. Of course, he's an old man now. And there was a total of 4 dads and 5 boys. This took place in 1967. They were living in Fargo, North Dakota. And a couple of the dads had gotten together and decided they were going to take themselves and the boys on an excursion up to the Ontario area to fish for muskies. So this was a real big deal then and today for any kids to go on a trip like this. So they had gone up to, I believe it was Perrault Falls Airport, and somewhere around there they caught up with a couple of float planes that took them over to a place, I believe it was called Ear Falls. And they had a cabin, a big cabin, plenty of place for the guys to stay and the kids. The fishing began. They had a guide. This guy's name was Lars, and they had 3 boats, 3 aluminum boats, outboard motors. They were going around the lake and fishing for muskies in the shallow. Most of the fishing was going on near the shoreline, throwing plugs into what was submerged weeds where these musky fish were hanging out. He told me that when you went around the lake, no matter where you went, the forest was dense and hard up against the water. And there were certain locations where there was some exposed shoreline. You wouldn't call it a beach, but a barren area here and there where no trees had grown. So the 3 boats are lined up facing the shore, casting plugs, having a good old time. And they hear what sounded like a bellowing lion's roar. And they had asked Lars, "What is that?" And he said it was probably a bear. Now, later in the account, the fellow that shared it with me told me that when Lars said it was a bear, something in his heart told him it wasn't. And as we get into this, he was right. So
okay, I'm going to stop you there. This is going to be a bit of a cliffhanger, William, because we're heading into the break here at the top of the hour. When we come back, we'll pick up on this amazing story. These 4 aluminum boats fishing for muskie in a heavily wooded lake area, and they hear a bellowing roar. Not a bear. Not a bear. And more of my conversation on the other side with William Sheehan, Bigfoot, like you've never heard it before. Shirley Temple was one of the most iconic child stars of all time, but with fame and success also comes constant scrutiny and the occasional conspiracy theory. Shirley Temple died in 2014, was best known for her charming singing and dancing abilities, along with her perfect image complete with blonde ringlets. And while most Americans would never dare speak poorly of Hollywood's sweetheart, a wild rumor began to spread across Europe that eventually grabbed the attention of the Vatican, the head of the Catholic Church. At the time of her fame, some speculated that Shirley Temple wasn't a child actor at all, but a 30-year-old adult with dwarfism dressed in a costume. Believers claimed that her stocky build, her full set of adult teeth, and her perfect hair, speculated to be a wig, were all signs that Temple was a fully grown adult. The rumor got so out of hand that the Vatican, which was often used in these kinds of claims as a neutral third party, dispatched an investigator to determine if Shirley Temple was a child or a sham. And you can read more of this remarkable story in the News section up at coasttocoastam.com. Back to my conversation with William Sheehan as we discuss violent encounters with Bigfoot right here on Coast to Coast AM. William Sheehan is the author of the Bigfoot Terror in the Woods series of books and also co-host of the Bigfoot Terror in the Woods podcast, BigfootTerrorinthewoods.com. We've hooked up to the website here at coasttocoastam.com. Before the break, William, we were talking about, this is back in 1967, some dads from North Dakota took their sons up to a fly-in fishing trip in Ontario, fishing for muskie. They're in these aluminum boats close to shore, and they hear a bellowing roar. And the guide, Lars, says, "Oh, that's just a bear." But nobody believes him.
Yeah. Well, so what happened, Richard, was another roar erupted shortly thereafter that, opposite in direction from the first one. So the witness said that, well, if that's a bear, he's either really fast or there's more than one. So these roars were going back and forth, and they were coming together to a point where they were happening just inside the woods in front of where they were in the boats. He told me it was so loud they were cupping their ears. And Lars told them to start the motors and move away from the shore. As they're going out, 2 Bigfoot come tumbling out of the woods onto this shoreline, slapping, grappling, and biting each other in what was like a ferocious fight, an epic battle right there on the shore in front of them. He told me that the sound was so loud it was vibrating the oars on the boats off the shore, and the waves were freaking coming out as they're wrestling and grappling with each other on the shoreline.
Wow.
Now, he also said to me that he felt they never punched each other. None of the blows were with a closed fist. They were whacking each other open-handed, grappling, kind of like Roman Greco wrestling. And he felt that the biting was used to gain an advantage, one over the right. When finally he said that with one titanic blow, one was leveled onto the beach and in the water, and he thought it was dead. And when that creature hit the ground, the other one raised its arms up in the air, howling at a volume that was just like ridiculous, and that's when they split. They left this thing in the woods, it turned around, it walked back in, and they took off in the boats. Now, Lars went back to the scene the following day and came back and told them that the creature that was in the water was gone. So what happened to that creature, anybody's guess. Maybe it wasn't dead, maybe it was knocked out, whatever, it got up, was gone, or maybe the other creature came back and dragged it away for dinner. I mean, I'm being facetious, but nobody knows what happened to the other creature. I mean, that is just an incredible. You can picture yourself as a young boy sitting in this aluminum boat. The fathers, the kids, Lars, they were just blown away by what had transpired in front of them.
And you were told this story by one of the sons of the dads who was on this fishing trip.
Right, who's now an older man, like I am.
Right. Yes.
So just incredible,
Yeah,
And
what do we surmise from that? That they're territorial? I mean, maybe they have their own rutting season? Maybe they were competing for a mate?
There's no doubt about it. I mean, some of this stuff is as plain as day, as you've just mentioned. All animals fight. I have bucks around my house here, and I hear them tangling during the rut. I can hear their antlers clashing with each other in the woods. I mean, all animals contend for mates, for domination, bears, elk. They're all entangling with each other for domination of the females. I mean, that's just the nature of nature.
All right, let's go to the phone calls, and we'll begin with Jason, west of the Rockies in Olympia, Washington, Bigfoot country. Jason, welcome to Coast. You're on the line with William Sheehan. Go ahead.
Thank you so much, Richard, for taking my call, and thank you, William, for this fascinating topic tonight. I'm a search and rescue volunteer here in Washington State. Proud to do it. I've been doing it almost a decade. We had a fascinating story amongst our folks up here about a yurt-type structure that was found in the Olympic National Forest with several dead deer around it. It was a structure that was formed with torn-off trees and obviously was not human-built. There was no saw marks or sawdust or any nature of that. They were formed together, this tree boughs and such. And so I was curious if William knew of the Bigfoot creatures, in his knowledge, if they build these types of structures. And there's a lot of missing people up in that area where this structure was found. And also, too, if William knew about the Nahanni Valley in Canada and the Valley of the Headless Men in the Nahanni Valley.
All right, Jason, great call. Thank you. William, do they build these types of structures? Do they build nests?
Yeah, there's no doubt about it. In fact, I was going to read you an account I call the Fifth Bullet, where a structure was found and the man was attacked by a Bigfoot. But when you look at these structures, you're seeing limbs in there 3, 4, 5, 6 inches in diameter, fresh limbs that were torn off of a tree, twisted and torn away from a tree. Think about that for a minute. What on earth has the power other than hydraulic machinery to remove a tree limb from a tree? I mean,
Precisely.
You and I could spend a month of Sundays trying to do that, and all we do is tear the skin off of our palms. So, yeah, there are creatures out there that are building these huts or little domains or protective shelters for themselves, and a lot of people are finding them stuffed or matted down with pine boughs inside, and some of them have bones inside as well. So I don't think it's too far of a stretch to say that something non-human made these things, and it wasn't a bear, as so many people keep saying in all these Bigfoot incidents. Oh, it must have been a bear.
Oh, sorry. I was just going to say, William. It also sounds as if one of their primary foods are deer.
Yeah, well, it's an easy kill, right? Either a small deer, if you find a fawn or a doe. I've had people report to me that they've seen these things running. I had a guy that saw one run down an antelope on the side of a mountain. Now, I'm not too sure how fast an antelope can run, but a lot faster than you or I, and this thing ran it down lickety-split like it was nothing. So 20, 25, 30 miles an hour. I think that runner, the Olympic runner, Usain Bolt, I think he was clocked at like 22 or 25 miles an hour. A Bigfoot, it's just off the charts, the explosive power they have in their anatomical makeup. But also, Jason, his area up there is rife with encounters, that whole Olympic Peninsula area and everything. And by the way, my friends, that is exactly where one of the evacuation training zone or survival training zones is on this survival training map that I have in my possession, right in his wheelhouse.
All right, Jason, thanks for the call. Let's say hi to Lee in Alabama. Lee, welcome to Coast.
William,
hi.
Your guest was talking about the two bodies that were discovered, and I know he said the second one they reported it to the authorities. I assume the one about the female was reported also. I was just wondering, has he been able to find any reports where they did a report, when the bodies were recovered and if autopsies were done and so forth?
Good question, Lee.
I kind of missed a little bit of that, Richard.
Well, he's wondering whether there was any follow-up in terms of a police report for either of these two incidents where the bodies were discovered and whether there were any autopsies performed.
Yeah, no, I have no knowledge of that myself. I take reports from people. I interview people, and then I put them out there for our perusal, for your perusal, and for my own chat about them. But I'm not doing any follow-up or detective work on these people. I just don't have the resources.
All right, Lee, thank you for that. Speaking of Bigfoot chasing down deer, there's another story. I think this was in the podcast, and that is, I believe you said it was a Mexican couple. They were trailing behind some kind of a truck or a vehicle, and that vehicle ended up on its side, and they pulled up to see if they could provide some assistance to the driver. Tell us what happened.
Yes, well, that came from a Mexican couple, and I call them Wilfredo and Helena. That was their name, but their last name I gave them was Gomez. That was not their real name, but they were a Mexican couple. They were riding down one of the roads up here in the Northeast, and they came across a debris field in the middle of the street. They're finding, as they're driving, they're noticing they have to evade these headlight bucket, piece of a mirror, some broken glass, and up ahead of them on the shoulder is a tractor-trailer truck with the flashes on. This is at night. Now, as they're approaching the truck, they're thinking this debris came from that truck. Approaching it, they see a big mound on the side of the road in the dark, but they're not stopping for that. They're going to the truck. They get up there. Wilfredo jumps up on the fuel tank, grabs the handle. The man is holding his head slumped over the steering wheel, and he says to him, "Sir, are you okay?" And he doesn't answer him, so he asks him again. Then the man lifts his head up. He says, "Are you okay?" And he says, "Yes. I just hit a Bigfoot back there chasing a deer across the road." So Wilfredo was like, "You hit a what?" And he said, "I hit a Bigfoot. It was chasing a deer across the road." Now, Wilfredo said the front of this guy's truck was trashed. He was leaking water out of the radiator. The left front fender was bashed in. The headlight was out. One mirror was torn off. This was the debris he had seen in the street. They called the police. The police came, an ambulance came, and then another car came. They were tending to the man. By this time, the man's out of the truck, and one of the cops starts walking back at what was seen on the shoulder. Wilfredo is following him at a distance. The cop told him to stay back, and he had a bright flashlight, like a mag light. When the cop put the light on what was on the side of the road, Wilfredo said it was a gorilla. The cop shone the light on it. Wilfredo said he saw the thing blink and raise a couple of fingers. The cop shooed him off and finished this thing off with a few rounds out of his handgun. Shortly thereafter, Wilfredo and his wife were, left the place. They had nothing else to do there. And talking amongst themselves, they thought this would be a big deal on the news the following day, or maybe make the papers. And they heard nothing about it.
So the police officer killed, the Bigfoot was injured, having been hit by a truck chasing the deer. He basically put it out of its misery, it sounds like.
Yeah, and I know these kind of things happen. I mean, it's a small change kind of thing, but when we were kids, my sister and her girlfriend ran across a possum that was injured in the woods behind our house. And I guess my parents at the time, I was little, they must have called the cops, and the cop came over, leaned on a tree. We all stayed up by the house. He leaned on a tree to get a good steady shot with his .38, and he shot this possum, put it out of its misery. So I guess it's common practice. You find a deer wounded, you find anything wounded, they're allowed to take their gun out and dispatch these creatures.
Well, somewhere there's a body of a Bigfoot. Be curious to know what they did with it. All right, we'll take a quick time out. Bottom of the hour. More of your calls for William Sheehan. Back with more of our conversation right here on Coast to Coast AM. Say hello on Twitter at Richard Serrett. UFO reports have been steadily rising in frequency over the last few years, possibly due to the increased use of drones and other small anomalous aircraft. But in 2023, it seems to have reached fever pitch. Russia has announced they shot down what they described as a UFO. And just this morning, the U.S. government revealed they had been tracking a Chinese spy balloon that many had mistaken for another UFO. But not all unidentified flying objects are made the same. There's a video in the news section. You can check it out. It's a possible UFO over Baltimore that was captured on video in January. It's still up for debate. In the video, a man claims this shiny silver ball is the size of a helicopter and was flying in such a straight line and so quickly that observers figured it must have been crafted by someone or something intelligent. Again, that's in the news section up at coasttocoastam.com. All right, back to more of your calls for William Sheehan as we discuss the violent and darker side of Bigfoot right here on Coast to Coast AM. Back to the calls for William Sheehan as we discuss the darker side of Bigfoot. Let's go west of the Rockies, and Brian is in Kent, Washington. Brian, you're on the line with William. Go ahead.
Yeah, I got a story for you. It comes out of Oregon around 2000. Dr. Matthew Johnson had a sighting down in Southern Oregon Caves National Monument, and people were calling him up and emailing him because he's a clinical psychologist. And essentially what happened is a guy, a game warden from up north in Makua National Forest, told him a story that was pretty amazing. He came down and bought him lunch. Essentially what happened was a guy, game warden said he had a friend who knew where Bigfoot was. He knew what part of the forest it was in. He was going in with a rifle and get one of them and prove the Patterson-Gimlin film was true. So he goes in, week comes by, nothing happens. Week comes by and he doesn't come out, so he goes in after him after 2 weeks, and he found him, what was left of him. According to the autopsy, he'd been pummeled to death. No claw marks, no bite marks, just severe beating. His rifle was laying on the ground, 2 rounds fired out of it, and the barrel bent into a U shape.
Wow.
Yeah. And
that's remarkable.
This guy.
William, have you heard that story?
I haven't, but to go along with it, a fellow told me about his friend's wife called him on a rainy day saying that Chip hadn't come home, and he went to a place that they called the shooting gallery. It was basically a gouged out piece of earth where they used to go rifle shooting, target shooting. He told his wife he'd go down there and check on him. When he got there, his gear was on a picnic table they had in the middle of this dirt pit. And Chip was not there, and he wouldn't answer to his call. He saw some footsteps going up in the corner of the wall in the back of the pit. When he got up there, there was a puddle of blood, and Chip's Minnesota Vikings hat was laying in it. He then saw Chip's rifle bent in half, not too far from the hat. He went back down by Chip's pickup truck, surrounded by Bigfoot tracks, large human-like footprints. And then when he looked in the window of the truck, Chip's body was bent in half with his eyeballs bulging out, shoved in front of the bench seat under the dashboard.
Oh, dear Lord.
So, it doesn't surprise me that this man was pummeled to death. You ran into the Bigfoot that I'm talking about on a bad day, and for whatever reason, it decided to take out its angst on that man.
Brian, thank you for that call.
Rich,
go ahead.
Rich. I say all the time, Rich, if you meet up with Bigfoot and go home, you've had a really good day.
I'd say so. All right, wild card line. Randy is in Florida. Randy, go ahead. Randy, are you there? Randy in Florida, going once, twice, 3 times. All right, let's go to the wild card line. Wayne is in Tacoma. Wayne, welcome to Coast.
Good evening, gentlemen, Sir Richard. And I had quite an experience climbing in the Olympic Mountains in 1966. It's the Lake Constance climb. It's a 4.4-mile round-trip climb, and it's like a 3,300-foot climb. Getting up to the lake's about 4,800 feet, and this is not an easy climb. It's not a casual hike. It's considered a Class 2 and sometimes a Class 3 scramble. It requires continuous attention and careful handwork to go all over up that area. And anyway, I had just come out of the military service, the Air Force. Had quite a harrowing experience there, and was getting together with a friend of mine to do this climb. And in the last minute, he just kind of backed out of the climb, and I said, "Well, I'm going to go myself because, I wanted to get away from the city, the family, commune with God." And I did this climb. Halfway up the climb, I met a couple coming down from the lake. They had been fishing there, and they caught 2 fish, and they gave me one of the fish, and I thanked them for that. And it took me a couple of hours to do this climb. Very harrowing and very hard, and it was getting late in the evening when I got up there. The ridge around the lake, the first area, it's about 300 or 400 feet from the woods. There's no woods up in this area. It's about, and the woods there is the old tree growth. So about 300 or 400 feet above that, on the ridge, I made it up there, and there was snow all around and ice all around, even on the lake, except for kind of in the middle where they threw their fishing lines. And the ground, like I said, was covered with ice, except for one spot around a tree that was right at the edge as you get up. And so I said, well, I'm going to, sleep here overnight. And I really didn't come prepared. I wasn't really a hiker or a climber or an outdoors guy. I came with not really heavy clothes. I did have a light down sleeping bag, and it was getting dark, and I knew it was going to be cold because I could feel the cold coming in. It was a clear night, and this was in May of 1966, early May of 1966. And so I climbed in my sleeping bag, pulled it over my head, and it couldn't have been more than, and I was out sleeping right now. Couldn't have been more than 10 or 15 minutes later, I heard all this noise, clomp, 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 all around me, and so I stuck my head out, and there was these raggedy-looking mountain sheep or goats. They had the curly horns, rams, I guess you call them. They had the curly horns, and they were losing. It was a bright moonlit night. I could see their fur was coming off and that. And, they were going to keep me awake. So I just let out a bear call real loud, and screamed. And they scattered. And I said, good, I'm going to be able to go back to sleep. Well, unfortunately, it didn't work out that way. Every 5 or 10 minutes, they would come back, wake me up. And I did this all night long. And needless to say, by the time the morning came around, this was like 9 at night, and I woke up at 5 or 5:30 in the morning when the sun came up. I really wasn't waking up. I was just frustrated, tired, exhausted. I got up out of my, bag, stuffed my down bag in my backpack, climbed on down to the ranger station where I'd parked my car. And the harrowing experience that I had was, getting down to the main road, and I shouldn't have been driving. I was so tired. And as soon as I hit the main road, within a minute, I fell asleep at the wheel.
Oh, dear. And
started going off towards the Puget Sound area, big hill that went down to the Puget Sound. And I just cried out, Jesus, help me. And there were bumps on the road that year. First year, the highway department had put bumps down the middle of the road. That woke me up for just a little bit. And, another less than a minute down the road, there was 2 hitchhikers. I picked them up, and they kept me awake all the way, into the. They asked me where I was going. I said Olympia, because that's where I lived, out on the bay, out from Lacey. And they kept me awake, and they wanted to be let out about 4 or 5 miles outside of town in the flat farm area. And so I said, oh, okay, it wasn't at an exit or anything. It was kind of in between exits. I thought it was kind of funny, but I said, okay. I pulled over, let them out, looked out. There was no traffic early in the morning, pulled out, turned around to wave goodbye. And these guys weren't there, and that kind of shocked me, because there was no place they could have gone. And, I didn't think much about it because I was so tired. And I got home, and I was so tired, I hit the sack, and I slept for 18 hours. But, later on, I realized, these weren't normal guys. You don't disappear like that. And then I thought even more about it recently. When I was up there with all these rams circling me, there was something else going on. And I don't know if it was a bear that had come out of this cave or a Bigfoot or what. I didn't hear any growling or noises like that. But I think these wild mountain goats were sent there to keep me alive, honestly.
Ah, fascinating. And so what were these 2 hitchhikers? What do they have to do with all of this?
Well, God sent these guys. They were angels.
To keep you awake. Right. Angels.
Yeah, they kept me awake.
Absolutely.
Exactly.
I believe that. Great call. Great story, Wayne. Thank you so much. Let's work in. Let me see. Neil is in Pittsburgh, California. Is that right? On the wild card line? Neil, are you there?
Yes, I'm here. Can you hear me?
I can. Is it Pittsburgh, California?
Yes, it is.
Oh, okay.
Well, Richard, thanks for taking my call.
My
I
pleasure.
always look forward to when you're guest hosting. You always have such great shows. I look forward to yours. And I look forward to Connie Willis. And you guys are great. And I just want to tell William, thank you for coming on tonight. And a big shout out to his brother Kevin. And always carry more guns than you think you're going to need.
You got that right, brother.
That's how you end the show, right? That's how you and your brother Kevin end the podcast.
And by the way, Richard, I appreciate what the brother is saying there, but I'd like to hear from some of these people myself, and this is exactly how I gain information. If they go to BigfootTerrorInTheWoods.com and hit the contact link, I will call you. And you give me your number, and we'll get together and we'll discuss what it is you've seen and heard. And, you know, we have the podcast, Bigfoot Terror in the Woods. We're in our 4th season. We got 4.7 stars, thousands of reviews. I'm talking Bigfoot all the time and a lot of other strange stuff. So tune us in.
All right, Neil, thank you for that. Go ahead, Neil. Neil, did you have another comment?
Yeah, I love the podcast, and I hope that when Connie goes on her Bigfoot excursions that she's really careful, because she does those.
Yes, she does.
Yeah.
All right, Neil, thank you for that. Let's see. John is in Duluth, Minnesota. We'll have to move quickly, John, but welcome aboard. You're on Coast to Coast AM. Go ahead.
Hey, yeah, just thanks for having me.
My pleasure.
Thanks for taking my call. Yeah, for taking my call. Hey, just a quick question about whether or not your feelings on the fact that George Norrie has like neo-Nazis on his show now. And
No, okay, thank you for that. Let's say hi quickly to Don in Alberta. Hey, Don, welcome to Coast.
Hi, Richard. Hi, William. I was listening to the story about the highway tractor and the hitting the Sasquatch. If that's what it takes to take one out, it's pretty amazing. One day I was driving down a country road and with a highway tractor trailer unit, and this cat streaked across the truck in front of me. And I'm like, phew, kind of gives you a jump. It was like 4 o'clock in the morning. And then right behind that was the coyote, and it was thump, 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 thump. But that's not why I called. Recently in Jasper, Alberta, it's all over the net because this guy used to document his life. And there's a road that goes it's in the Jasper the park. Mm-hmm. There's a road that goes from Banff to the town of Jasper, and it's kind of just weaves through the mountains. And I'm pretty sure I know the range, but he took a video and he showed this tall, large thing. I don't know. Everybody's still debating whether it's correct or not, but and then it got worse after that. But anyway, he videotaped it and posted it online, and then he showed military helicopters coming in, posted online. Canada doesn't have much of a military, as you know that, and then some other stuff, and then he did some other videos saying it was all fake, and then he came back and said, no, it's all true, and then he disappeared. So I don't know what happened to that, but this thing would, based on the size of the mountain, if it's the one I think it is, I'd have to go out there and refresh my memory, but this thing was absolutely huge. I don't know if it falls into the Sasquatch category or not. The other question I have quickly is, previous guests on your show has said that Sasquatch can move from one dimension to the next. So even though you see them and you're, let's say, using a firearm on them, or the tracks disappear in the sand, it would give an indication why a firearm may not work against them. That, or they're a little bit tougher. So that's my comments and questions.
All right, Don, appreciate that. Yeah. The interdimensional aspect of Bigfoot. Your thoughts briefly, William.
Well, twofold. First of all, I had a couple of guys that almost got killed by a Sasquatch in Jasper National Park. But if we had more time, I believe there's two things going on with Sasquatch. You have a flesh and blood creation, a being that eats, drinks, walks, gives birth, lives and dies. And then I believe there is a mimicking going on in the satanic realm of Bigfoot that are not really living creatures. And this is the explanation for creatures showing up on infrared and basically disappearing behind a veil. You don't just disappear. Heat doesn't just vanish in the woods. It's got to reappear. It's got to show up somewhere. I don't care what kind of brush you're going through, you're going to see something. But I've seen videos of creatures going behind what appears to be a straight line. I also have tons of reports in my books, Bigfoot Terror in the Woods Sightings and Encounters, where footprints go and then they end.
Right. Okay.
Go ahead.
Well, we got to wrap it up here, William. We're going to have you back on. Absolutely riveting. Bigfoot Terror in the Woods.com. You can check out the podcast there. And, of course, the Bigfoot Terror in the Woods series of books. William Sheehan, thank you so much.
Awesome, Richard. My pleasure to be with you. Hopefully we'll do it again.
Absolutely. All right. When we come back, the Yeshua Protocol, Pastor Carl Gallups standing by in hours 3 and 4. Stay with us right here on Coast to Coast AM. Say hello on Twitter at Richard Serrett. Don't forget the website, strangeplanet.ca. In his new book, The Yeshua Protocol, Carl Gallup writes, no matter how we approach the matter, by employing scientifically applied computer programs, peering into the unfathomable depths of quantum physics, revealing stunning ancient Hebrew letter meanings, or by unearthing some of the most shocking of the latest archaeological finds, he is there, standing on the Mount of Olives and looking down upon the hills and valleys that uncannily encircle his name around his holy city, peering through the most powerful computerized microscopes the world has ever known to find Yahweh's name encoded upon our own DNA. And even by looking at the undeniable Yeshua codes buried within the pages of the Old Testament as they were first penned in the original alphabet, we simply cannot ignore the truth of the matter. The presence of his name, etched upon every page of the scripture, is utterly inescapable. He truly is the Aleph and the Tav, the Alpha and the Omega, the first and the last, the beginning and the end. Yeshua's name encoded upon our DNA? Really? Can't wait. Carl Gallups is next on Coast to Coast AM. Carl Gallups is a critically acclaimed Amazon top 60 best-selling author. He's a former decorated Florida law enforcement officer, the longtime senior pastor of Hickory Hammock Baptist Church on the Gulf Coast of Florida, and the host of radio talk show Freedom Friday. Carl frequently appears in television, radio, and print media, interviews as a commentator and pundit for all things geopolitical, biblical, and prophetic. He's also a well-known conference speaker. He's the author of numerous books, including Masquerade, Prepare for the Greatest Con Job in History, The Summoning, Preparing for the Days of Noah, and his latest, The Yeshua Protocol, an explosion of revelation for our unique generation. Carl Gallups, welcome back to Coast. How are you?
Richard Serrett, man, I'm doing great. Thank you so much for having me.
My pleasure. The Yeshua Protocol. Why the name, the Yeshua Protocol?
Yeah, thank you. Well, listen, as most of your audience, I'm sure, knows, the word Yeshua is the Hebrew word that eventually translates through the Latin and the Greek into English as Jesus. So that's the Hebrew name for what we would say in English, Jesus, Yeshua. And then protocol, of course, that's a term that's used a lot. It's become extremely popular, movies, etc. But protocol, of course, means an applied set of principles and rules, agreed upon regulations for how something is carried forth. So we have military protocol, we have scientific protocol, et cetera, et cetera. So the point is, the book is titled Yeshua Protocol because his name is everywhere, and this is the point of the book. And as you said earlier in the introduction, I mean, it's not only everywhere in the Word of God, of course, but in layers of the Word of God that could be heretofore previously be unseen, as well as understandings and pictures of his name in the ancient Hebrew language that's mind-blowing. I've got 41 illustrations in this book. And then, of course, it's in geography, it's in archaeological discoveries, it's in our DNA, as you were talking about. It's in the quantum physics area, the quantum particles of an atomic structure. It's unbelievable. And all of this is coming forth in powerful revelation before the world only in our lifetime. Oh, some of it's been in the Word of God, of course, forever, but it's just now that either we are first discovering it in our lifetime because of technological advances, and plus just the ability to immerse oneself in these sciences and in these arts, if you will, because of our access to the internet and all the libraries of the world. But the most important reason is because we are the only generation to live in the age of an absolute technological exponential explosion. And it is through these technological devices and applications that we find most of this stuff. And then when we find it, we do what you and I are doing right now. We use technology that's now broadcasting all over the globe. And then, of course, technologies on the internet, you know, videos and websites. So 24/7, the revelations of these truths of Yeshua's name, the name of God, the name of Jesus himself, the name Yeshua, embedded everywhere, absolutely everywhere. And that's what this book talks about. And I give a lot of examples. I go into the deep understanding that the Bible itself prophesied. This is amazing, Richard. In the Old and New Testament, a technological explosion of the last days, a marker of the last days, was prophesied in both the Old and New Testament. And I unfurl those and do a little bit of word study in the Hebrew and the Old Testament and in the Greek and the New Testament to show you. And scholars have seen this forever, but it's just never really been talked about. But here we are, right in the middle of it all.
All right, so let's talk about the prophecy of this explosion in technology, that we are the first generation to see this exponential growth of technology. I believe it's Daniel chapter 12, verse 4.
Yes, it is. And as a matter of fact, let me just start with this opening explanation. So it doesn't take one long at all to get on the internet and do some research and discover that, yes, we are the only generation. I mean, since the flood, when everything was wiped out before that, I mean, here we are. And so in thousands and thousands of years of human history, we're the only generation to experience an absolute exponential growth in technological explosion. And that's happening now. You know, now we think of computers and internet and all that as a part of it. Well, of course it is. But there's so much more technology that's come in the military field, in the medical field, in the chemistry fields, quantum mechanics, DNA mapping, and genetic auditing and editing, all of that in our lifetime. And it all started, I mean, big time started right around 1950-ish. In that area. So it's just in our generation, if you will. And of course, just 2 years prior to that, the prophetic nation of Israel was reborn in a 2,700-year-old prophecy. The nation of Israel is back. Now Jerusalem's connected to it. Technological explosion that is undeniable. Now quantum computing is right around the corner and is already being used. That's going to explode it even further exponentially. So anyway, back to what you said. Yes, Daniel chapter 12, verse 4, and then that correlates to Matthew 24, where Jesus himself speaks of this. Yes, he does. I know some people are listening thinking, well, Jesus never speaks of a technological explosion. Actually, not only does he do it, but he relates it back to Daniel 12. So let me unwrap Daniel 12 very quickly. Very quickly, Daniel 12, and I'm paraphrasing, I don't have it right in front of me, but I've read it so many times. It speaks of, Daniel gets this whole revelation of the last days. In fact, it says, This is in reference to the time of the end. It says that in the book of Daniel, chapter 12, the time of the end. By the way, I want your audience to know I'm not a date setter. I'm not some sensationalist. A lot of what I say is sensational because the Bible is sensational. Our technological discoveries are sensational. So I'm not a date setter, but I do know that the Word of God says when you see Israel return, when you see Jerusalem come back, when you see the nations that are listed in Ezekiel 38 kind of lining up to come against a returned Israel, when you see a technological explosion, that's what Daniel 12 speaks of.
We should also point out
in those days.
We should also point out, Carl, before Daniel 12, verse 4, sort of the context here is that Daniel has been transported into another time, another age, perhaps our current age today, or even beyond.
Yes,
and he practically faints. He practically faints at what he sees.
Yes, he does, and the Bible says that, and he says that he couldn't stand, he couldn't see. Imagine if you and I, if this world went on for another 2,000, years or more, 2,400 years. Can you imagine if we were transported through some portal, through some time application, time advance application technology into 2,400 years from now? Now, consider where we are now. Consider the technological explosions now. Can you imagine 2,400 more years unabated of that kind of explosion, what the earth would look like? We couldn't even comprehend it. It would bring us to our knees. We wouldn't know what to think about it. Well, that's the experience Daniel had, because in Daniel's day, they were still riding horses, brother. They were walking wherever they went.
Mm-hmm.
And then now this. So Daniel sees all of this. And in Daniel chapter 12, he's told by the angelic visitation that's revealing all this to him, he's told, now seal this up, Daniel, seal it up in a scroll. Okay, and we can talk about that unsealed scroll later, but he says, seal it up in a scroll until the time of the end. Now, that implies, of course, that in the time of the end, it will be unsealed. Well, I'm telling you, and this book shows you, it's being unsealed right before our eyes. But then the next verse is the most important one. He says, unseal it until the time of the end. He says, and people, many, will roam to and fro over the face of the earth, and knowledge will increase. All right, that sounds pretty benign. Many will roam to and fro over the face of the earth, or travel to and fro, whatever translation you use, and knowledge will increase. But here's what I do in the book, because for hundreds of years, renowned scholars have read that, and you got to remember, hundreds of years ago, there was no technological explosion, but yet these scholars understood that that's exactly what that verse meant. Now, they could not have imagined our day of internet and cell phones and nuclear weapons and on and on and on, CRISPR-Cas9 and genetic editing and quantum mechanics and the depths of it. But when Daniel is told this, as I said, scholars know that that's what that meant. Now, what I've done in the book, though, is I've taken the words of that verse that are translated from Hebrew into English. I go back to the original Hebrew words, and the nuances of the meanings of those words are astounding, and I'm going to share them with your audience. And one of the ways that I help people understand this is, in the book, is that not only do I show you those nuances of those words, but I show you how the nuances that are there, that when they're inserted in that verse correctly, it exactly says that it will be an exponential explosion of technology. But I show you how those words are used in other scriptures of the Bible, beginning in Genesis, in the way of those nuances. Let me give you an example of what I'm talking about. So it says, for example, it says, many will go to and fro over the face of the earth. Okay, well, the word many comes from the Hebrew word rab, R-A-B, rab. And what that means, it means an uncountable multitude. And I give examples in my book of places in the scriptures where that word uncountable multitude is actually used in the English translations in other verses. I don't know why it's not used in Daniel, but it just says many. But, what's many? 10, 100, or uncountable multitudes, 10,000 times 10,000, 100 million or more. as a way of stating it. And the Hebrew dictionaries actually say that. Uncountable multitude. And then it would say, for example, 10,000 times 10,000, because that phrase is used in the Bible. Okay, so now you put the word uncountable multitude will roam to and fro. Well, the word there in Hebrew is shawat, and that's the same. See, to and fro, that's kind of an archaic English term. We very seldom use that in common everyday speech. You know, where have you been, Carl? Well, I've been going to and fro all over the place. We don't say that. But what that means, the way it's used in the scriptures, it's like when Satan in the book of Job is called before the throne of God, and God says, "So where have you been?" Now God knew where he'd been, but you know it was a conversation between the two, and he was trying to make a point about Satan's wickedness. But anyway, Satan answers, "I have been going shawat over the face of the earth, to and fro over the face of the earth." Satan's domain is the entire earthly realm, as well as what we would call the spiritual realm, the unseen realms. Paul talks about in Ephesians 6 of the wicked presence of Satan and his demonic. And so he uses that term. Also, the Bible uses that same term to speak of God. His eyes roam shawat over the face of the earth. So in other words, it's a global encompassing, an encompassing of the entire globe. So now we get back to Daniel. Let's keep going. So Daniel, seal it up to the time of the end, because uncountable multitudes will be traveling over the entire face of the globe. And then it says, and knowledge will increase. That word increase comes from the word rab, but it's rabbah, the verb form, and that means an exponential multiplication type of growth of things. And it goes all the way back to Genesis, when God says, you know, he filled the earth, the sky with birds, and he says, and let them rabbah, let them multiply and fill the earth. Animals, let them rabbah and fill the earth, multiply and fill the earth. Fish under the sea, multiply. He's talking about exponential growth, multiplication. Even Adam and Eve were told to procreate, and then eventually the earth to fill, to subdue the earth, grow and multiply, exponential growth. Now let's go back to Daniel, since I've said all of that, and it takes on a fresher and newer understanding that is the actual Hebrew meaning of it. When he says, now Daniel, you seal up this scroll, the things you've seen about the time of the end. He said, you seal it up until the time of the end. In other words, it will be unsealed. And then he says, and here's the marker of the time of the end. Now, those words that I just spoke are not in the Bible, but that's the context here. Seal it up until the time of the end, comma, and then it says many will roam to and fro. Okay, so he's saying this is the marker of the time of the end. Now watch, I'm using the words properly from the Hebrew and as they are used in other places. Daniel, seal it up until the time of the end. And in those days, this is the marker. Uncountable multitudes of people will be traveling and traversing the entire globe. And then knowledge or technology, and that's where we get our word technology. There was no word for technology in the ancient Hebrew. That was invented by the Greeks about 200 BC. But he says, and technology will explode exponentially, rabbah. Well, brother, that's what's happening right now. We can get on the internet. Well, there's technology. We can track every airliner in the world at one time in real time. It is covering the globe. Millions of people are all over the globe, uncountable multitudes traveling, not counting up and down interstate highways, ships, nuclear-powered submarines and ships and cruisers, and the seas are filled with people traversing the entire globe. The air is filled with people traversing the entire globe. We have satellites in the heavens and in space looking down upon the whole globe, and those satellites are connecting to information communication and some transportation devices, GPS, the entire globe. Uncountable multitudes are traversing the entire globe, and knowledge. And I've got several pages about just knowledge, the exponential growth of knowledge. Forget technology, just knowledge itself. You can get on the internet now. I can go to any book in any library anywhere in the world, all the way back to as far back as books were written. So knowledge has exploded exponentially, and so has technology. That's exactly what Daniel was saying. And the quick connection to Matthew 24, the disciples have asked Jesus, tell us about, quote, the time of the end, which is what Daniel. I'm going to spare your audience all of this, but Jesus quotes from Daniel 12 3 or 4 times in Matthew 24. But one of the things Jesus says, he says there'll be wars and rumors of wars all over the world, nations against nations, kingdom against kingdom. A lot of people say that he was speaking of the days of world wars. Ours is the only generation that is called the generation of world wars. World War I, World War II came in
Carl,
only
got to jump in here. We'll take a quick time out and continue to discuss the new book, The Yeshua Protocol. Back with more of my conversation with Carl Gallups right after these. It won't be giving Tinkerbell a run for her money anytime soon, but this impressive new robot known as Fairy, flying aero robots based on light responsive materials assembly, is undeniably unique and could give rise to a whole new category of lightweight flying devices. Inspired by the way dandelion seeds float on the breeze, the robot is made up of tiny 14-micron thick filaments, which are connected to a light-activated actuator. When light is shone on the device, the filaments move, enabling a range of configurations. Once its bristles are deployed in a certain way, it can fly into the air using only the wind. Its designers hope that it could one day help to mitigate the loss of pollinator insects, such as bees. The Fairy can be powered and controlled by a light source such as a laser beam or LED, according to Tampere University robotics professor Hao Zheng. And you can read more about the Fairy robot in the news section of it, coasttocoastam.com. Sounds a little bit like what Carl Gallups was talking about in Daniel 12:4, doesn't it? All right. When we come back, more of my conversation with Pastor Carl Gallups as we discuss the Yeshua Protocol right here on Coast to Coast AM. We are back with Carl Gallups, the author of the Yeshua Protocol. So the scroll that Daniel is instructed to seal up until the time of the end, and Daniel 12, chapter 12, verse 4, appears to be describing the highly technological age we are living in today. The contents of that scroll that he was instructed to seal up, any idea what is in that scroll, and is it the same kind of information that Jesus or Yeshua divulged to the disciples after he arose from the dead?
Yes, and backing up to where we left off, because it goes to exactly what you just said. And I want our audience to know, look, I'm a preacher, teacher of the word. I was a cop, even did criminal investigations for years before I was in the ministry. I think like that. I want all the evidence. I want the DNA, the fingerprints, the witnesses, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. So in my books, I mean, the things I'm sharing with the audience, some of it is pretty sensational, and it's getting ready to get more sensational as we move deeper into this conversation. But it's all backed up in the book by renowned scholars and scholarship and science sites and geographical sites and archaeological sites and biblical research sites and historical research sites. So anyway, having said that, so let me move forward. Yeah. So to answer your question, let me go right back to where I was in Matthew 24 when Jesus is speaking of the time of the end, and he talks about the time of world wars. And then he says, watch this. He says, but this gospel of the kingdom will be preached to all the nations. Now, in the Greek, it literally says it will be being. It's active. It will be continually being preached unto all the nations. Then the end will come. And again, I don't set dates, and the end doesn't mean the end of everything. According to the word of God, it means the return of the Lord and the end of man's wickedness. But the bottom line is this gospel of the kingdom. Now think about it, Richard. He quotes from Daniel 12. 3 or 4 times in that Matthew 24 discourse. But when he says that, this gospel of the kingdom, okay, and we already know that Daniel 12:4 now means that one of the signs of the end is this huge exponential growth and explosion of technology like the planet has never seen, and that's happening now. I'm familiar with the fairy robots you were advertising earlier. It's amazing. That's amazing technology. But think about how that could be weaponized. I mean, not only can it be used for agricultural purposes, but it could easily be weaponized. And so that's the world we live in. Technology, is it good? Yes. Is it evil? Yes. Is it from the tree of the knowledge of good and evil? Yes. One of the good things it can do, watch this, we are literally proclaiming the truths of God's word 24/7 to all the nations all around the globe, and this will continue until the Lord returns, apparently, because it's going over airwaves, it's going over internet, it's being archived in videos and books and every website. No generation before us has ever seen anything like this, and Jesus spoke of it when his disciples asked him, what are the signs of the times of the end? And he quotes a lot of things, a lot of them from Daniel 12, but he also makes that one statement that most people completely overlook because we think, oh, yeah, there are preachers out there, true. And also I want your audience to know, listen, I know that not everybody listening are believers, and I'm not here to be preachified and get in your face. I'm just telling you what the Word of God says. I'm showing you what science says. I'm showing you what the world says. I'm showing you what renowned scholars say. I'm doing searches of scientific and technological explosion with you. So just take it for what it is, but I'm telling you what Jesus said 2,000 years ago, he nailed it. But of course, if he really is the Son of God, and of course I believe he is the Messiah, if he is that, then of course he would know that. Daniel was given the vision. He was told the same thing. Uncountable multitudes will traverse the entire globe, and there will be an explosion of technology using perfect Hebrew words with the nuances of those words inserted as they are used in other places in the Old Testament. That's exactly what Daniel said in 12:4. Then Jesus punctuates it in Matthew 24 by saying, yeah, and another sign of those days when this gospel doesn't have to be taken by a missionary that gets on a ship and it takes months to go to another nation like it was, just 150 years ago. He says, no, it'll be going all over the globe. And the implication is 24/7, everywhere, unto all the nations continually. Well, that's us. There's been no other generation before us. And then your specific question was, but after the resurrection? Yeah, I make a big deal of that in the book because the Bible does. After the resurrection, the Bible records that Jesus was on the face of the earth for 40 more days before he ascended, and he spent much of that time with his disciples. And that's not just the 12. He first reveals himself to the 12, and of course there were women disciples and there were other men disciples, so even more than 12. But even in the scriptures, Paul is speaking to the church at Corinth, and he said, look, he revealed himself to over 500 of you at one time. He says most who are still alive by the time Paul is writing. So if he was on the earth for 40 days, and in just one occasion alone he revealed himself to 500, how many thousands did he? But the bottom line is, the scriptures say that when he met privately, especially with his inner circle, 4 different times in various ways, and I'm going to just paraphrase what he says, but this is exactly what the Bible says, and my book outlines it. It says he showed them he showed them in the whole Word of God. And in that day, that would have been what we call the Old Testament, because it says from the law, which is, Moses, to the Psalms, to the prophets, he showed them everything about himself. And what I do in this book, and it's pretty mind-blowing, is I take people into the beginning from the first verse all through the Old Testament and show various pictures and declarations. And I'm talking about not just surface level pictures. I do show some of those, but I'm talking about using the ancient Paleo-Hebrew language that the original Old Testament was written in. There are literal pictures, not only of Yeshua, but of him on the cross. There are pictures of Golgotha. It's absolutely amazing, and I'm convinced that Jesus showed his disciples some of this stuff, because I'm telling you, I make the connections, and it would be too laborious for this radio interview, but in the book, in very exciting ways, I make the connections of how could a bunch of fishermen and tax collectors written this beautiful document of the New Testament that not only changes lives around the world and has for thousands of years, but when you study it the way I do in this book, you see they are making connections, deep, intricate, almost mysteriously hidden, unless you know the kind of things we now know in our generation. They're making the connections all through the Old Testament of the pictures of Jesus, and it's
so in other words,
unbelievable.
When he is resurrected, he meets with the disciples, and he says, and he shows them, here I am in the Old Testament.
Yes. The Old Testament, the gospel actually says that 4 times. Yes. Go ahead.
So give me an example, because you have a chapter titled 3 Old Testament Crucifixions. Tell me about that.
Yeah. Okay. Well, I do. Yeah. Okay. There's so many different ways. But that's a great place to start. So thank you. Yeah. There are 3 pictures in the Old Testament that are there, right there in the surface text, that I call them the crucifixion chapters, because they speak directly of somebody that these prophets are peering into the future, or they've been literally taken through a time warp, transported into our day. Because see, in God's presence, there's no time. There's no hindrances between multiple dimensions. God created all of that. The Bible's clear. He created all the dimensions, the universe, or the universes, even if we say it like that. So he took David, and I'll explain this in a moment, into the future. He took Isaiah into the future. He took Zechariah into the future. Say, Carl, how can you say that? Okay, David, Psalm 22, the first verse. My God, why have you forsaken me? Well, where have we heard that before?
Jesus on the cross.
Cross. Mm-hmm. Yeah. Jesus spoke that on the cross. That's the first verse of Psalm 22. Well, what was the last words Jesus said? It is finished. What's the last words of Psalm 22? And God has done it. In other words, it is finished. He was quoted the first and the last verses of Psalm 22 from the cross. Well, what does Psalm 22 say? Well, it speaks of some things that happened in David's life, but then it morphs, and this is what's called a compound prophecy. There are several of these in the scriptures, and scholars have been writing about this forever. It's not been hidden. It's just not been preached much. So most people sitting in pews don't understand this concept, but it's called a compound prophecy because it morphs from David's life into this stuff that never happened to David, and he speaks of it in the first person, almost like it's happening to him. But when we look at the details, we realize he's standing at the foot of the cross, because it says in Psalm 22, he says, they surround me, a band of evil men surround me, they mock me, they laugh, they stare, they say, he saved others, let him save himself. He says, my tongue sticks to the roof of my mouth, I can look down, all of my joints are, my bones are out of joint, I can see my ribs, I can see that. And then it says, they have pierced my hands and my feet, they gamble for my clothing. On and on he goes. I mean, good gosh, that's a detailed picture of the crucifixion. Now, David wrote Psalm 22 1,000 years before the crucifixion, and Jesus quotes from it. And not only that, but here's an example, just one example of something completely sensational that I put in the book, is the first verse in the original Hebrew, and you can see it in today's modern Hebrew. It's there. In that first verse, my God, why have you forsaken me? And the next few words after it are, and why are you so far from delivering me? When you look at that in the Hebrew, if you can read Hebrew, and I show it in the book and explain it, so even if people can't read Hebrew, you can see it. It's right there, and I've got it circled. But where it says, why are you so far from delivering me? those words, so far from delivering me, 5 words in English it takes to say it. It's one Hebrew phrase. It's one Hebrew word. And so in the middle of it is Yud Shin Wa Ayin in Hebrew. That's the name Yeshua. Right in the middle of that huge word, that Hebrew word that means so far from delivering me, is the name Yeshua. Right
Remarkable.
there. So it's like his name is in the first verse. He quotes it, and his name is there. But go ahead. I'm sorry. I think I interrupted you.
No. I'm just I'm flabbergasted. So, are you the first person that has found these Yeshua codes in the Old Testament?
Well, let me say this. I'm not so arrogant or vain to claim that. Surely 8 billion people, other people are seeing this or had to have seen it. But let me tell you the experience that happened to me. Because what I just shared with your audience is astounding, but it's deeper, deeper, deeper than that. The pictures that the letters make. 3 crosses on a hill, Golgotha, Jesus in the middle.
I'm going to get to that, Carl. We're heading into the top of the hour. We'll get to that on the other side. Carl Gallups, the author of the Yeshua Protocol. And taking us into the break, here's Struggle Jennings and Jelly Roll, Hard to Hate, a collaboration between Nashville singer-songwriters William Harness and Jason DeFord. Back with more of my conversation with Carl Gallups right here on Coast to Coast AM. Police in Michigan responded to a rather unusual call this week after a concerned resident reported seeing a chupacabra. According to a local media report, the strange incident occurred this past Wednesday evening when a woman in the community of Jerome Township, that's in Michigan, phoned 911, claiming that the infamous cryptid was lurking outside her home and, as if that's not odd enough, the creature was accompanied by a capybara. Despite the wholesale weirdness of the call, or perhaps because of it, police were dispatched to investigate the report of a blood-sucking chupacabra and its docile rodent companion roaming around the area. An amusing recording, which you can listen to on the website here, is of the exchange between the 911 operator and the officer who received the assignment, captures the absurdity of the situation. Again, you can listen to this 911 call. That's in the highlight carousel up at coasttocoastam.com. And tonight, that's Sunday night into Monday morning, Donald Altman is a psychotherapist, former monk, award-winning author, and international mindfulness expert who's trained over 15,000 mental health clinicians, physicians, nurses, and others. He joins George Norrie to discuss using the power of the mind to revisit New Year's resolutions and salvage attempts to effect change and find peace in this tumultuous world. In the second half, psychologist, journalist, and founder of Love, Fraud, Education, and Recovery, Donna Anderson offers webinars to help survivors and professionals identify, escape, and recover from sociopaths, including narcissists, psychopaths, and other manipulators. And she'll share the latest research on psychopaths and sociopaths, how to spot them, and how to rid them from your life. All right, when we come back, your questions and comments for Carl Gallups as we continue to delve into his book, The Yeshua Project, right here on Coast to Coast AM. And we are back with acclaimed Amazon top 60 best-selling author Carl Gallups. The latest is The Yeshua Protocol, an explosion of revelation of our unique generation, or for our unique generation, I should say, including some 45 illustrations. Carl, how do we get a copy?
Yeah, thanks. You can get them anywhere books are sold, online, brick-and-mortar stores. One of the easiest, quickest places is just my website, carlgallups.com. Click on the store link. You'll see all kinds of ways you can order it. You can look at the website. You can read inside the book. But, again, it's on Amazon, Books A Million, Barnes & Noble, brick-and-mortar stores, et cetera, everywhere.
So we were talking earlier about how, what's that old saying, that the Old Testament is the New Testament concealed. And how there are, and you believe that this is what Jesus was showing the disciples after his resurrection during his 40 days. He was basically pointing to Scripture, the Old Testament, and saying, here I am here, and here I'm mentioned here, and here's another one, that an actual picture of the crucifixion, I suppose, formed out of Hebrew letters found in the Old Testament.
Yes, yes. And it's exciting because it starts in Genesis 1:1 and it goes to the three crucifixion passages that we're talking about. So I'll quickly do a review of that as we move through. But I also want to finish answering. You asked a question that was a very fair question, and I could have, stuck my chest out and said, "Yeah, I'm the first one to discover this." You asked if we had, but I said no. I would never be so arrogant to claim that. But I do have an anecdotal story about that that's in the book, because I was in Psalm 22, one of these crucifixion passages. I was in the first verse that Jesus quoted from the cross. My God, why have you forsaken me?" And that verse goes on to say, "And why are you so far from helping me?" And on the phone with me, in that verse, by the way, is a picture of Golgotha's Hill in the ancient Hebrew language. And so we'll get into that in a minute. But I called a good friend of mine in Israel. He's in Tel Aviv, born and raised in Israel. His name is Zev Porat. He's my advisor on all things Hebrew because he speaks Hebrew as his first language. His father, his grandfather, his great-grandfather were all rabbinical judges in the Israeli courts. They all speak Hebrew as their first language. Zev is a believer, a messianic rabbi, if you will, teaches the Word of God from that aspect. And so he's a dear friend of mine. We've been in ministry for a decade. And so when I was finding these pictures in Psalm 22 made by the Hebrew letters, I was freaking out. And I called him. I said, "Brother, am I really seeing this?" And so he looks online with me, and he looks at the Hebrew, and we're looking at it, and he says, "Oh, my gosh, yes, it's there." Now I'm sure, I scoured the internet to see if anybody else had seen exactly what I was seeing there, and I couldn't find it anywhere. Now, that doesn't mean nobody has. But while I'm showing him this picture of Golgotha in the first verse of Psalm 22, which David, 1,000 years before the crucifixion, is saying things like, "They have pierced my hands and my feet. My tongue sticks to the roof of my mouth. They gamble for my clothing under my feet. They mocked me, saying, 'He saved others. Let him save himself.'" It's all right there. Now, obviously, David saw the crucified Jesus. He was taken through a portal to a time warp, something. As a prophet, God showed it to him. David spoke of it in the first person as though it was happening to him. Those things never happened to him, but they did happen specifically to Jesus. So I call Zev, and I'm saying, am I right in seeing this? I don't want to put this in the book if it's not correct. He says, "No, it is." And then he screams into the phone because he's looking at it in Hebrew. And he says, "Oh, my gosh, Carl, in the first verse, the name of Jesus is there." I said, "What are you talking about?" He says, "You can read a little of the Hebrew." He said, look at the Hebrew. So I'm looking, and I don't see the name Jesus just slapping me in the face. I said, "I don't see it." He said, "Carl, look in the word that in English it says, 'so far from helping me.'" He says it's one word. It's a long Hebrew word. Look at it. And right in the middle of it is embedded Yud Shin Wa Ayin, which spells Yeshua, the name of Jesus, right in the middle of that word. And he says, "I've never seen this before." I said, "I didn't either." So he's quoting that verse that not only has a picture of Golgotha's Hill in it, which is exactly what's happening. He's on the cross. He's the man in the middle. There's a thief on each side, 3 crosses. He quotes that verse, and in that verse, there is a picture of that in the Paleo-Hebrew. We'll talk about that in a second. But Zev is screaming into the phone saying, "I am seeing this for the very first time." I also scoured the internet to see if anybody else had ever mentioned that. I can't find it anywhere, but again, that doesn't mean that somebody hasn't found it. Maybe somebody's even written to it. So I'm just answering your question, but I'm just also sharing with that anecdotally this journey that I was on while writing the book. Is just one astounding revelation after another. And yes, Jesus told his disciples 4 different times in the New Testament, it says after the resurrection, he sat down with them, he says, and beginning in Genesis or the law, and through the Psalms, that would include that thing with David, and into the prophets, and that would include Isaiah 53 and Zechariah 12, the other 2 crucifixion passages, says he told them everything about himself. I'm convinced that the kind of things that we're revealing in this book, Yeshua Protocol, are the kinds of things, if not the exact things, that Jesus showed his disciples. Why would he not have? That would not have taken any technology of that day. It would just take him saying, now look at this. Now that it's all happened, now that I'm been crucified and risen from the dead, now that I'm sitting here with you, now go back and look at our own scriptures. Here are all the pictures of me in the surface text, Psalm 22, Isaiah 53, Zechariah 12. But then he says, now look at the letters. Look at the three crosses. Look at Jesus in the middle, because the one in the middle is always connected to the name of Jesus one way or the other. And I show this in the book. I show it to you with your own eyes. And I say to the reader, I said, look, I know you could say, well, this is just some big coincidence. Well, first of all, after you've looked at 40 illustrations like this in specific places, it's awfully hard to say it's coincidence. But what I say to the reader is, look, I'll give you that if you want that. But here's the deal. You're looking at it with your own eyes. This is statistically impossible. So what are you going to do with it? This book has been around for thousands of years, and there's no other religious book in the world where you're going to find this kind of stuff. None. It's just in this supernatural book. So anyway, that's that. And I think he did show them because the Bible says he did.
All right. West of the Rockies, let's say hello to Charles in Sacramento. Charles, welcome to Coast.
Thank you very much. I'd like to ask the guest, because he knows a little bit about the Hebrew, about Genesis 12:8, when Abraham goes between Bethel and somewhere out in the desert and builds an altar. Anyways, it translates as AI, and that's not like a stretch. You can find that anywhere, and which kind of means a rubbish heap, the place for rubbish, and there's like a huge metaphor between the antediluvian, Noah days and AI and what's happening today. And then also I'd like to know the biblical laws related to harvesting were that you were supposed to leave some of the fruit for the poor to come and get through gleaning. And I'd like to know if the host thinks that applies to all harvests for all time, if there shall be some left for gleaning. So thank you.
All right, Charles, let's start with artificial intelligence mentioned in Genesis. Is that true?
Yeah, well, Charles, listen, thank you for listening tonight, Charles. And those are excellent questions, and they're kind of brain stumpers for me. Listen, I'm familiar with both of those speculations, and I call them, and the word speculative, I'm not using derogatory here. It's not a pejorative. I call it biblical speculation, and that is we look at and we find these things, and it's okay to ask those kinds of questions and to explore them out and even draw conclusions, as long as we say, and you sound like a reasonable guy, Charles, who would do that look, I'm only speculating, but it's biblical speculation, because here it is, right here, right before your eyes. And so you're talking about the word Bethel, and so in the Hebrew, those letters they do correspond to the English alphabet of AI to spell the word Bethel if you spell it in Hebrew. So people have seen that, and they said, oh, my gosh, maybe there's something to do with that. Well, maybe there is, Charles. Maybe there isn't. There's a lot of controversy about this among scholars. Most scholars don't think that's directly connected to what we would call artificial intelligence. But you know what, Charles? I'm not going to say never, 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 because I'm finding things that are right before my eyes, and I'm confirming them with a guy that speaks Hebrew as his first language and went to the rabbinical training schools to be a Sanhedrin rabbi, graduated, was ready to do that before he came to Yeshua as Messiah. And he and I both are finding such astounding things. So the bottom line is, to both of your questions, I hear you. I know they're asked. They're good questions. I don't really have a good, deep, solid answer for you other than what I just said. So, but keep looking, keep digging, keep studying. And think about it, Charles. Look at the age in which you and I live. We live in the age of exponential explosion of technology. I mean, how in the world could we even you and I see these things and find these things, except for the internet and websites and people that have done the research, and then the libraries and the ancient Hebrew language, the modern Hebrew language. I mean, think about it. If we didn't have internet and somebody said to me, "Hey, what's in the first verse of Genesis in the Paleo Hebrew?" I'd have to go to libraries. I'd have to research for days to find all of that, and then to get experts to help me and to translate it, and maybe find other books and get a librarian to spend hours with me. Now I can do it in 5 minutes. I can do it in 5 minutes. So, Charles, thank you for asking those questions. I'm sorry I couldn't answer any deeper than that, but I think your questions are good and fair questions.
All right, Charles, thank you. We just have a couple minutes here before we break at the bottom of the hour, but staying with the subject of artificial intelligence.
Yeah.
Your thoughts on whether it's possible that AI could give rise to the Antichrist?
Oh, yeah. Listen, I really do think that somehow that's going to be involved. I mean, it's got to. Why? Well, because who is the real intelligence of everything? Who is it that speaks to DNA and encodes it in a language using 4 amino acids as its language, and then causes it to operate and differentiate between a tree and a human? A tree has DNA, we have DNA. There's a language there that is intelligent, and it has been given through the inventor and creator of all intelligence and all language, the supreme intelligence, Yahweh Elohim, God himself, the creator of everything. So Satan, the fallen one, wants to be him. Doesn't want to be like him. He wants to be him. The Bible says that. Isaiah 14, you hear Satan's words himself saying, "I will be him. I will be like the Most High God. I will sit upon the throne." So the bottom line in answering your question is this: that intelligence, the ability to communicate in code and language and now in technology, is essential to life itself, not only organic life, but also artificial life, computers, code, instructions, satellites, internet, everything. I mean, electron microscopes, everything runs through some type of artificial intelligence. So, yes, I mean, you read those, what seem to be cryptic passages in Revelation, but now we're the first generation that can read the book of Revelation and say, that's not so silly anymore. This one called the Antichrist that can call fire down from heaven. Well, we've got that technology now. We've got drone technology that's operated by satellites that's communicated by people in a desert in the middle of the United States or some other nation. It's crazy. And we're calling fire down from heaven. We're the only generation to see that. And so that requires intelligence and a certain amount of artificial intelligence. But what you're talking about is taking it to the level of some kind of manifestation. Well, Revelation 13 talks about that. He causes an image to live and breathe. We're the first generation to read that and say, well, with the current technology we have, we've got concerts of Michael Jackson with holographic image, and he lives and breathes, even though he's not here, right there on stage, and people are looking at it. Hollywood stars. We've got videos of Hollywood stars watching that in shock with their jaws on the ground, some of them saying, "This is freaky, this is weird, this is scary, this is unbelievable." And that's just the technology we already have. So, Richard, yes, it's got to be involved somehow in this whole plan of duping and deceiving the entire planet. And he wants to be like God. He wants us to believe he's God. He wants us to worship him as God. He wants to mark us, whatever that technology means, and we can
Carl,
debate that all night.
I got to jump in here. Pardon the interruption. We'll take a break. Bottom of the hour, come back. More questions, comments for Carl Gallups, the Yeshua Protocol. Back with more right here on Coast to Coast AM. Once again, say hello on Twitter at Richard Serrett, and don't forget the website, strangeplanet.ca. All right, let's get back to more of your calls, questions, and comments for Pastor Carl Gallups as we discuss the Yeshua Protocol right after these on Coast to Coast AM. Carl Gallups and the Yeshua Protocol. And Carl, before we get back to the phones, I have to ask you about this the name of Yahweh encoded in our DNA?
Yeah. Listen, there are about a dozen astounding revelations that I bring forth in this book, Yeshua Protocol. That's one of them, and in fact, the book almost ends with that. It's really amazing, and it's one of those things that people don't have an answer for other than what's right before their eyes. So Dr. Israel Rubinstein, I don't have it all right here in front of me, but it's all in my book to the nth degree. You can even go to his website. But he is a biological chemistry professor in a major university and research center, experimental biological research in Israel. He is a Hebrew man, of course, Israel Rubinstein, and he's got several degrees. His pedigree is beyond my ability to even pronounce all the words. The guy's a brainiac genius. But the bottom line is, I ran across a YouTube video not too long ago with him speaking to his students. You can't see his students, but you can hear them, and you can see that he's speaking, sitting behind a desk. And he tells this story. Now, I transcribed the whole story and give him full credit and got all the credits in it and everything. But I transcribed his speech to those students. And what he's saying is, he's saying back in the late 80s, when computer technology was really coming in and it was affecting computer microscopes, computer-driven microscopes, et cetera, that he was doing deep study of DNA. Now, this is just a few years before the DNA Genome Project started in 1990 and then was completed in 2003. But he was talking about this and all of the study he was doing. But he noticed that when he was looking at the DNA of animals and even human DNA and the double helix formulation of a strand of the molecular strand of DNA, and then the four letters ATCG representing the amino acids that are a part of the DNA structure, but more than a part of it, those are the communicating principles, the communicating chemicals that literally form a language. All biological scientists understand this, and that language sends codes, and the codes tell our entire body who we are. Are we a human, or are we a blade of grass? If we're a human, are we male, or are we female? Are we short or tall? What color is our hair? What color is our eyes? And on and on and on. And the DNA not only does that, but it sends instructions to the organism as it's developing in the womb as to, look, we need to create a brain, we need to create a liver, we need to create a nervous system, et cetera, et cetera. I mean, it's amazing. It's just billions and billions of pieces of information that are being chemically produced with no apparent connection to any kind of information source within the chemicals itself. This is some of the latest technology. The biological chemists are saying we don't understand, and there are videos on the internet. I've showed these before in church, and the people just go crazy. And it's all over the internet that we don't understand. How is this communicating? It's communicating with intelligence. Well, Israel Rubinstein, this video he made, he's showing his students, he's saying, look, back in the late 80s when I was researching this, I was seeing under these microscopes that not only does all of that happen that I just said, he said, but I also noticed that the DNA double helix is held together by some kind of a strand and of some kind of chemical makeup, and it actually holds the DNA molecule together. He said, so I did deeper research, and I asked the computer, which was programmed with artificial intelligence, to understand how to respond. And he asked, what is this? And his discovery was that these are what are called disulfide bridges. Now, you can get on the internet and do research on that. Anybody sitting in their office or living room can do this. It's very, very complex, I'll tell you that. But here's the bottom line. He said these disulfide bridges, they're chemical bridges that form in the DNA to hold it together. He said, now that's fascinating, But he said what really got my attention was that these bridges were appearing in a specified pattern in the DNA double helix. And he said, and they were attaching themselves according to the ATCG amino acids. So he asked the computer, what is the rhythm here? What is the pattern? And it came back with the answer that the disulfide bridges attach in this order. Every 10th amino acid, there's a bridge. Then 5 amino acids from that one, there's another bridge. Then 6 amino acids from that one, there's another bridge. Then 5 amino acids from that one, there's another bridge. And then it starts over, 10 amino acids, 5, 6, 5, 10, 5, 6, 5, 10, 5, 6, 5. So he's saying that, and he looks at his students and he says, now, you know what 10, 5, 6, 5 is. And you can hear that some students responding in the affirmative, yes. And then he screams it out. He says, it's the name of God. It's the name Yahweh. Now, for your listeners who are saying, how in the world is 10, 5, 6, 5 the name of God? It's very simple. It's plain as day. For the Hebrew person, it's right in front of their face. That is the Hebrew alphabet, made up of 22 letters and then 5 suffix forms. 5 letters have an ending form and a beginning form, so there's 27 letters total. And of all of those letters, each letter is assigned a numeric value. And this has been going on since the beginning of time. But this is not, we're not talking about gematria in the mystical formation of numbers and letters. We're talking about, because that's how their ancient math was done. And so it's carried over even into the modern Hebrew, that the letters have a numeric value as well. And the name of God, the most ancient name that we know, and the most prolific name in the Scriptures, Yahweh, Yud-He-Wah-He, is the Tetragrammaton. It's made up of 4 letters, Yud, He, Wah, or Vav, depending upon how one pronounces it. Yud, He, Vav, or Wah, and then He. Well, the Yud represents the letter, it's the number assignment is 10. The He is 5. The Vav is 6. The second He is 5. 10, 5, 6, 5. 10, 5, 6, 5. And it's been that way for the ancient of days. And we're just now discovering, well, not just now today, but in the last 20 years or so, or 30 years, that's the pattern by which the disulfide bridges hold every strand of DNA on the planet together. The name of God.
Remarkable. All right, let's grab a couple of calls here. Let's see. Let's go to Norman is in St. Louis, Missouri. Norman, welcome to Coast.
Great show tonight, guys. Great show.
Thanks, Norman.
Yeah, got a couple. I actually watched that YouTube video about a week ago. It's amazing. YH.
It is, isn't it?
YH, right?
Yeah. I had no choice but to put that in my book. I just was blown away when I saw that months ago.
I've been a Christian my whole life. I'm 63, but I've always accepted Jesus. Created everything. And funny you said something holds something together. The Bible says that Jesus holds all things together. So
I go into that. That ties directly to quantum mechanics at its most
I got something that I think will blow you away. I'm like I said, it's all come natural to me, or I just accept because I was in church my whole life. But every now and then you see something or read something that'll kind of blow your mind. But you were talking earlier on prophecy, and I'm into eschatology, but this was more like Old Testament prophecy. There was an actuary, and he was very, like you were saying, this guy had credentials, the professor. He was the same way, but in the actuary field. And he wasn't a believer, but he crunched some numbers one time recently. I think it was in the last 5 years. And it was on the fact that Jesus' birth, death, and resurrection, there was over 300 prophecies in Isaiah and, different Daniel and whatnot. And there's 300 Old Testament prophecies concerning his birth, death, and resurrection. And he said that in order for those to come to pass as they did, that you could fill, this is mind-blowing, you could fill the whole state of Texas with quarters, knee-deep, so about 3 foot deep, he said. You put an X on one of them quarters. Then you get a guy or girl and put a blindfold on them. They got to reach in them quarters and find that quarter with the X on their first pick.
Yeah.
So if you don't believe in Jesus by now, you're just destined to go to hell. You deserve hell.
All right, Norman. Thank you. Go ahead, Carl.
Yeah. I'm sorry, Richard. Listen, and Norman, thank you for listening, and thank you for your kind words about the show tonight, and also thank you for that illustration. Listen, to Norman and the rest of the audience, I have read and even quoted various statistical analyses of the Word of God similar to that, Norman, and there are some out there that are done at the deepest scientific levels, and you were describing that person as being that, so I'm not questioning him or that illustration. I've never heard that specific illustration, but there are other illustrations out there taking the nuanced elements of all of the prophecies of, as you just said, the birth, the death, the resurrection, the things he would do, the things he would say, the miracles he would perform. And when you consider 8 billion people alive right now and all the billions that have lived, and even those that came before the time of Jesus, add them all up, all the billions and billions and billions of people, and only one single person that has ever been known to the history of this planet fulfilled every one of those prophecies in minute detail. And so even if some naysayer wants to, tear the prophecies apart and pull the nuances apart and say, well, there's not 300, there's only 4 or 5. Okay, well, if there was one prophecy that only one person on the planet ever fulfilled, and it could not have been a self-fulfilling prophecy, what would you say to that? Well, what if there's 3 or 4? What if there's 10? What if there's 20? What if there's 200 or 300? I mean, so you're right, Norman. It just gets down to statistical improbabilities, and then when you consider there's only one book on the whole planet that dared to speak those kinds of prophetic things, that there is a coming one. He will be born in a certain place. These certain things will happen. He will deliver himself to a Roman crucifixion cross. He will rise from the grave. He will open the eyes of the blind in front of thousands. He will do all of these things. And it happens. I mean, it happens. The calendars of the world are changed to this day. The date 2023 does not apply to the actual age of the earth or the actual age of humanity. It speaks of the Christ event. About 2023 years ago, the Christ event took place. There was a man who walked the face of the earth that fulfilled those dozens or hundreds of prophecies only in one book. He fulfilled them to the nth degree, carried them out even unto a gruesome death. And Richard, I was saying earlier about the 3 crucifixion passages.
Yes.
Psalm 22, they pierced my hands and my feet. Isaiah 53, they have the punishment that brought us peace was laid upon his back. He was pierced for our transgressions, bruised for our iniquities, and it goes on to say, but he will live. He will see the light of life, and he will rule and reign. I mean, it's like not only the crucifixion and the piercing, long before all of that was done by the Romans, but then the resurrection is spoken of. Zechariah 12, God himself speaks in multi-dimensional language. He says, and on that day, says the Lord, you will look upon me whom you have pierced, but you will mourn for him as an only son. I mean, this multi-dimensional language of it's really me, but you're going to call him the Son of God. and you're going to see me on that day. And then it goes on to say in Zechariah 13, and on that day a fountain will be opened in Jerusalem, and all who are plunged beneath that fountain will have their sins washed away. And I mean, we write songs about that and praise songs. And so anyway, the scriptures are filled with that. Plus, in my book, Yeshua Protocol, I take you even deeper than that, right to the technological levels, right into the DNA, right into the quantum mechanics of atomic structure, right into the surface text, to the ancient Paleo-Hebrew, and show you the pictures that are made by the letters that will blow you away. And even to the point where this rabbi friend of mine in Israel is looking at these languages with me and these verses on the phone, and he exclaims, "Oh my gosh, Carl, look what else is there." And then he tells me, there's the name of Jesus hidden, buried in the first verse of Psalm 22, the verse Jesus quoted from the cross, the verse that points to Psalm 22. They have pierced my hands and my feet. They're gambling for my clothing under my feet. It's all right there. And that was written 1,000 years before. So I've got about a dozen of these kinds of revelations in this book. So anyway, so Norman, thank you for all that. It is impossible. It's statistically impossible, except that it did happen. There's something very supernatural about it.
The Yeshua Protocol, and again, that's available wherever fine books are sold, Amazon, and of course, you can also go to carlgallups.com, and we've linked up to Carl's website at coasttocoastam.com. Can't believe how those 2 hours flew. Carl, thank you so much. Absolutely riveting stuff.
Thank you. You're such a gracious host, Richard. I appreciate you letting me unfold a lot of this stuff. I love your audience calling in and talking. I appreciate that as well. Thank you for everything. I've enjoyed this night. My goodness, or this time together. The time has flown by. It really has. To me, anyway. I hope your audience liked it as well.
Absolutely. Yes. All right. Thank you, Carl. We'll talk again soon, I hope. For George Norrie, George Knapp, Lisa Lyon, Stephanie Smith, Tom Danheiser, Dan Galanti, Chris Burrows, Michael Cozio, Donna Walker, Sean Ladisor, and in Brantford, Ontario, Scott Park. I'm Richard Sarrett. Thank you for your ears and your voices, your beautiful voices. Until next time, so long for now.